rehearsals in one of the studio of Rosas, May 2020. You were supposed actually to premiere, to open a new piece in something like 10 days in Vienna. I would like actually to start this conversation by talking about how much actually the current situation is informing the work you are working on at the moment.
Well, the situation is special in that sense that I plan to make a solo.
Mm-hmm.
That after nearly 40 years ago I made violin phase. I made once to the music of John Baez in 2000, 1 or 2. So every 20 years I make a solo. Keeping Still with Anne-Veronica Janssens wasn't 10 years ago, but it was a solo. Solo with 2, yeah. So it was, to a certain extent, it was a gift from heaven, because in these days of confinement, of social distancing, of you can't share the space with somebody else, it was actually the ideal situation to make it. I started making the solo while I was in New York in January, working on West Side Story. So that was also somehow similar to what happened when I started to make violin phase while I was living in New York for 1 year. So the contrast could be not more extreme of being after 40 years back in New York, working on West Side Story, and then sharing that with researching, which I consider making a story for question mark, how many next years. You know, I'm turning 60 in June. I gave Fazen and violin Fazen over to Yuika and Soa. I decided this is the last thing I'm gonna do for myself, without wanting to be, no, not pathetic, but I really love to dance. I find both in my choreographic practice, as the director of parts, as I find the experience of looking for choreographic writing, experiencing that from inside my body, developing own vocabulary and developing a language, which is like, as I always define it, embodied abstraction. So it was to bring that physical practice, to bring all the thoughts and theories that theories is a big word, but the ideas that were merging over those 40 years, to bring them together is the best to do it in a solo. And it means to lock yourself up, you know, in the complexity I have of guiding this company and having the responsibility for so many people. It's a hard job to close the door and say, not now. So you have to sort of lock yourself up to do that. So in that sense, it was
Coincidence between...
It was coincidence, it was ideal. I started the first rehearsals after New York, I started them to do in a little school in Keersmaeker. And Diane Madden, who is accompanying me, was following the rehearsals with Zoom. So the space was very small. And then after a while, Rosas closed completely down. I was all alone here in this space, and after a while, Diane could join me. I think it's the ultimate exercise in embodied abstraction, and how physically you feel how the world is like, and what's happening in the world is like unnatural luxury solitude. Yeah. where you're longing for the others and you're facing yourself. I think the working through the screen was the most difficult, because it gives focus and distance in the same time. You know, choreographing is organizing the space between people. And that was suddenly, we got in a kind of, everything was screened off. I think we all went through different stages, from unbelief, then from disbelief, to sadness, to being courageous, to trying to understand, to revolting, to say, well, this doesn't make sense, it's ridiculous. Questioning so many of our essential things as human beings, as being part of a society, a Western society. But I do think that the arts are affected by it, but performing arts especially. And I think from the performing arts, dance more than ever, because it's all about the body. Our instrument is the body, is what is inside, outside. It's our direct relationship with the earth, and suddenly we realize that we're part of a physical community, and that we're not in the Anthropocene, but in the Eremocene. Yeah. Suddenly there's this loneliness that we experience. I think we all share it to a certain extent. Or we're discovering things which are essential. It brings us in a very direct way to questions: where do we come from, where are we, and where are we gonna go to? My main concern is also about younger generations. You know, I have children, but I also have people in the company who have, what do you do with small kids? What is the perspective, you know? I think these concerns have been a part of my life already in the last 20 years. You know, the first performance I made, which was directly handling, in an explicit way, handling with that, was Keeping Still, which I made with Ann-Veronica Janssens, which was made 2007, yeah, it's 13 years ago, and that in a very explicit way spoke about that. I just think everything came quicker than I expected.
But this virus, I remember the first conversation on the phone we had at the beginning of the crisis. You told me about for you the violence of it, because it's really attacking the body, and as you said, the body is really for you the main tool. But it's also for me, when I think about your practice and I think about this virus, it's of course a threat for the body, but it has also huge influences on time, as you said, and on space. And these also elements are absolutely fundamental also in your practice. I'm also thinking a lot about the uncertainty actually that we are experiencing since now 2 months, because I think we are all used also in our practice, our professions to schedule a lot of stuff and works a lot on deadlines. How to deal also with this uncertainty?
Well, the thing is that in the last years, my ecological concerns, my worry about what's happening with the Earth, with planet Earth, what's happening with humanity in relationship to that Earth, has been extremely concrete. And so the regular practice in which that we are in, namely, you very much realize that you're part of a capitalistic system of producing and traveling, taking airplanes. We're anchored in a globalized capitalistic system of consumption, and we are not different from that. And I've been asking myself and asking the company also a lot of questions about it, of how to change it.
Mm-hmm.
With Rosas, we're in a very particular situation, is that we're one of, I think, of the fewer companies, anyway, in Belgium, who still have a structure where we have a fixed group of dancers. We have a large community with a lot of freelancers, but we still have very much this community of dance artists and who work on new creations, on repertory and all that. And our main income is not from subsidies, but is from performing. Mm-hmm. And selling 75%. 75% of our income is from performing. So we normally at a rate of 250 performances a year, which is enormous. And we perform in big halls and in small halls, basically mainly in Europe, but all over the world. Mm-hmm. We're at, financially and as a business model, we are in a dramatic situation because we had to cancel 100 performances. And we're losing enormous financial loss, which is endangering the continuity of the company, mm-hmm. and which is mainly also making impossible to invest in new generations. Yeah, or where you put for the dilemma, do you stop with people you've worked with many years, older generations? And where do you give priority? Where I think in a harmonious model, you combine both. Mm-hmm. You combine the experience, the craftsmanship of older people with the energy of younger people, just like I did in Brandenburger. You know, Brandenburger mm-hmm. was large scale, and it was like bringing older dancers together with mm-hmm. younger dancers. So this whole thing about having to make this like choices about one or the other, I think also no longer societal thing is, I think, is dramatic and not right, I think. I think that's what you should try to combine, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. you know. It is the body that is this house in which we get up every morning and with which we tell the most essential things to each other. Yeah, we speak with words, but I mean, now we see in an artificial way everything what takes in from outside and goes out. We're closing it up with plastic. Our practice is so much about organizing the time and space, organizing our time with the space between each other. Mm-hmm. The body in all its different aspects, mechanical way, in a sensuous way, in a social way, in an emotional way, in an intellectual way, in a spiritual way. And now there is basically the gaze that stays, which is a very interesting thing, I think, is that you touch each other with the gaze, which is like in late medieval, early Renaissance, you know, sculpture and painting.
Paintings.
Painting where you don't touch, but it's the gaze that touches.
So this reflection is something really more coming from this kind of distancing that is imposed at the moment for you to work much more like, for instance, through gaze, or it's...
Not really, not really. I've been in a... Since this whole thing, my walking is my dancing, my talking is my dancing, mm-hmm. my seeing is my dancing. All those different possible parameters of different definitions of dance. It was already a while, you know, there has been a number of parameters which start to really fascinate me, is like embodied geometry in the body, gravity. Yeah, gravity is defying gravity, desire to fly, But I think in this crisis, you know, what is really coming also very much is that the possible definition of choreography is to write to people. Chorus, from the Greek word chorus.
Mm-hmm.
And the chorus were the people in the Greek tragedies. They were commenting on the main characters. It's also the idea of circular dancing, yeah, or line dancing. And this politics, the definition of politics is how do we organize the city, yeah? There where a lot of people are together and close to each other. How we organize the common space, how we organize. So this is all sort of embedded in the DNA of choreography. I think it's our most powerful and our most fragile tool. What I do like about this in this process is that actually from the very beginning, my observation of nature as a possible source of inspiration for choreographing is coming sort of slowly together, and it's I think in this solo, which is called Goldberg Variation, to the name of the young pianist who was with Kaiserling, and which Bach wrote at the end of his life. Yeah, Bach wrote the Goldberg Variation at the end of his life when he was sort of retreating from his normal functions, because he was suffering quite a lot from the fact that he didn't get the social recognition, because his music was not more fashionable anymore.
Yeah.
But he will write das hohltemperierte Klavier, the hohltemperierte Klavier, the Künstlerfuge, and the Goldberg Variation, where he brings together all his, where his genius brings together his craftsmanship and his knowledge of how to bring the old style of and the new style together, vertical writing and horizontal writing.
Because of course, I mean, we can come back to what you said about this necessity in a way to come back to the format of the solo. It's like a cycle in a way, like every 20 years or something. But why with Bach? Why? I mean, I guess you were asked a lot of time about your relationship with Bach, with this composer. In this case, actually, because this choice of the format of the solo came together with the desire of working on this score, I guess.
Yes, I must say that Bach has been there from the very beginning. Huh? I already explained that when I was making Violin Phase, there were the Brandenburger Concerto which played with me. And I must say the big discovery during Rosas dan Rosas in 1983, that was Glenn Gould's Goldberg Variations. That was a discovery, wow, this was a different approach of it. A couple of years later, Steve Paxton made the Goldberg Variations. My interest in Bach has been from the very beginning. My really working with Bach waited till I made Toccata. And then gradually afterwards there was Zeitung and Zeitigung, and then there was Mitten, there was Partita with Boris, and then there was Mitten, and then there was Brandenburger. And people say, no, you should do something else than Bach, but seriously, it's not an easy one. Once you've been with Bach, how you get, when you're to do Bach, how you go back. I think because for me, Bach is so much about embodied abstraction. It's really that. And I can make a list of all those qualities, that it is about his rhetorics, about that it's always a life force going forward, upward, that it's always, as a spectator, you recognize yourself in it. It's as if it's full of emotions that you can't name, but that you remember of something in your body, in your mind, He said, it's always structured without being systematical. It's always about clarity in the big structure and in the detail. And it's always about movement, you know. So coming back to Bach, for me, my list is not finished. There is still some, but I will do an effort not to stay only with Bach. I think alternation is the most basic element of structure. So small Mitten, big Brandenburger, small Goldberg. You know, you go like chack, chack, chack.
Yeah, how do you use the score actually? Do you use it kind of chronologically, or you do movement back and forwards inside of it?
A mix. I analyze the score, I improvise to the music, and then you read about it, different sources of information. In this case, I spoke a lot with Pavel Kolesnikov, but also Alain Franco. And then generally also I start to develop vocabulary in silence. I decide about a basic geometrical pattern that could give the core of the music. And then here what was very peculiar was that I invited Diane Madden. She has been a dancer with the Trisha Brown Company. She has been her associate assistant, and she has been teaching with parts in the last years. So I felt the need to find my own movement. I've worked, you know, all those early years, Fazeros Zamstrozos, Elena Saria, Bartok. I made always vocabulary myself. I made that for drumming. I made that for rain. But I've made a lot of pieces, especially when the men came in, where the vocabulary comes from dancers. And that sometimes it creates a distance. Well, I'm longing for that, for experiencing that in my own body. In my own body. So I did that with Diane, but what was very good with that was that I had an outside eye who helped me to make choices, because it's always about making choices, you know.
And that's Diane, the outside eye.
Well, she helps me to articulate, so what is the gap between what I feel and what she sees, in a very technical way, but also in a poetic technical way. It's somebody who has the experience of doing that with a choreographer and knowing what is the right distance. So she has a very analytical eye, and she has a very inspiring voice. So I was not totally alone, you know. But I didn't have to transmit that movement to somebody else. I could constantly check. And then in relationship to your question, did I go chronologically? I both developed the idea of precise articulated writing and improvisation. Improvisation. And in combining both. Yes. And it also opened the voice of a different relationship with the music. Because since I took the option, listen, I'm not going to be able to work on canon and to work on different voices. The complexity and the structural framework, which is so beautiful in the Goldberg variations, how we're going to embody these layered voices, because canon writing is like the beginning. It's about the basic notion of counterpoint, of simultaneous happening different things. So that's not impossible with a solo line, but it's more complex. It's more complex to do that if you want to create counterpoint in the body. So that was a nice search, but that also, once I decided, well, the second person is not going to be there, second, third, fourth person, it opened also a certain freedom in relationship to music, which is in a certain sense maybe inspired by Steve Paxton, you know, who explicitly didn't want to have a framework, no framework. That was really the rule, that was also the sign of the times. The Zen-inspired practice that was typical of the late 60s. It was a structural, artistic statement, it was nearly also a political statement, but that created a totally different relationship with the music, which maybe also definitely was inspired by his experience as a Cunningham dancer and being part of the Judson.
I was just wondering about the musician, because I mean, also you are very precise, also in, I mean, for the people you are working with, especially with, I mean, with everybody, but the musician, in this case, piano playing, what's there? I'm wondering, which kind of partner is it for you, the musician, during the process?
But it's crucial, it's crucial. I mean, it was a long search, you know, as I explained before. For me, the Goldberg variations, I discovered them by Glenn Gould, and I was fascinated by them. Thierry de May, my musical dealer, he already many years ago, he told me, but if you you like Glenn Gould, you should listen to Rosalind Turek, because that's where Gould got his mustard. I worked with a lot of pianists, some very brilliant pianists, like Jos van Immerseel, who played toccata, with Alain Franco. I really went searching for somebody I wanted to work with. I knew some recordings from the latest years, like, for example, Alexandre Tarot has done very beautiful recordings from it. But I have quite some experience now in working with very good musicians, and what that does imply, it is fantastic, but sometimes it's schedule-wise complicated. You're very restricted because those people have very agendas. That was one parameter. I wanted to have somebody with a strong vision, who was in first place able to give vision to that music, and who was able to play it technically. And there was something in my idea that came, I really would like to have a young somebody. Not necessarily because there is this story that Goldberg was extremely young when he played it. He was 15 or 16. People are saying it's not possible because that music is so complicated. But anyway, So like I always do when I look for music, I asked for advice, and the director of the Brugge, who has a lot of experience working with young pianists, he gave me a list of a whole number of young pianists, and I started to look and to listen to all those recordings together with Jean-Luc Plouvier, who is a pianist from Ictus. And that's how I came to Pavel, by the recordings he did, but also by interviews I read with him. I found it was somebody who mainly plays the romantic repertoire. He did some very beautiful Couperin recordings. But also in the interviews, the way he spoke about things and how he spoke about sound. I also chose about including my partnership with Alain Franco, who has followed a lot of the things, so that I hope we can play this solo for a long time, and then we could also do it with different pianists. It's one of those things with Bach, is that, that would be not right, but even when it's played badly, it's always fantastic. No, but I find this idea of including the different interpretation into the writing, but that's for a next step. That's not in Vienna yet now.
We can maybe finish about next steps. Do you know how many pieces you created so far? Do you follow that? Or
No, I don't know anymore.
You don't know?
I think 45, 50.
45, 50. You said at the very beginning also, I would like now to make this solo for the I mean, how long would you like to do that? As long as possible? Goldberg is now
I think so, as long as possible. I think so. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but well, it's honest. I really love to dance. It's really not a joke, or it's not vanity when I say it's really my way of relating to the world. I really would like to continue to dance, or if because of all this crisis it's not possible, then I would like to go back to the farm. Then I would like to go into agriculture. And that's basically what I did when I was a little girl. You know, I come from a farm, and I was taking ballet class, and I was working on the farm. And I was riding the tractor, the John Deere's, and I was taking ballet class. That's the two things I really loved the most. So that's the only thing you can hope about, is that in this closing spiral, there is another spiral that directs us towards something else. And I see both signs. I have the people that count only about going back as quickly as possible, as quickly as possible as before, and other people that slowly start to realize something fundamentally has to change in the way we live, in the way we consume, in the way we eat, in the way we travel, in the way we build.
And in the way we dance.
And in the way we dance, well, no, in the way we share dancing. Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, yeah, I think internet and screens and online will never replace this. We share the same space and time, you know, because that's the old thing that comes from ancient times, you know. People were sitting around the fire at the end of the day, and they look at the sky and they look about nature, and people always danced because they were very happy, because something happened, or because they were very sad, or they were afraid from something, you know, and they thought that through dancing it could have a healing effect. It could put the ghosts away or what. And I do think that performing arts and art can have that healing aspect. We do know that animals dance. Do the stars dance? I don't know. Animals have a sort of consciousness, but we can do politics. And we could use dancing to make good government, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, not dance really. Those bodies have changed, and those bodies have the same as since ancient times. But we're a part of a bigger whole that is changing continuously.
Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome.